Risen 3 is the final game in the Risen trilogy from Piranha Bytes, and the last game to be published by Deep Silver. It came out in 2014 in August on PS3, Xbox 360, and PC, but then we were given the enhanced version on PC and PS4 the following year. Now, curiosity about the PC version. For anyone that wants the enhanced version, it's basically free upgrade if anyone gets all the DLC that's included along with the game. Mainly comes with like 2 island things or whatever and a costume set, which you can get pretty early with the DLC itself. So, Risen 3. Well, you don't play as whatever his name is, he's not in here. Even though he does make a cameo appearance at one of the islands, you're not playing as him, though you can talk to him. You're playing as whatever his name is. Wow, we got 2 guys in the game that has no name, whatever. Though the only background is that it's the brother of Patty and the son of Steelbird. Yeah, that's about it. So, of course, him and his sister were going to the island to go find some treasure that they were set out, only to then get ambushed by some sort of shadow lords, and your spirit or soul got stolen. So now, Bones, the guy who you probably met in Risen 2, if you didn't miss it, he resurrects you, and now you gotta go find some crews and, well, gotta stop the evil shadows. Speaking of Bones, I have a bone to pick with this guy, because at the beginning of the game, it's almost like they couldn't decide what voice actor they wanted.
And that means trouble. Our route permitting, we should stop and set things right. How about you lie down for a few hours?
Now, I mentioned before that in Risen 2, the combat is a little unplayable on consoles and whatever, and it's still pirate themed. Yeah, this game is still pirate themed for anyone that's wondering, but the combat is pretty much improved. Well, playing on the enhanced version, it runs at 60 frames, and yeah, I'm just gonna say right now, while playing on the PS5, I'm playing the PS4 version on the PS5, but you get it. Unfortunately, there's some issues I've had with the enhanced version, which I also heard that the PC version had the same exact issues. Now, for starters, I had 2 game crashes. Well, thankfully, it's not a lot of crashes, because otherwise I'd be talking about it all day or something. But let me just get to the point here. There's some bugs I found in the game, like sometimes you play the game for way too long, the character models will start to disappear. Like for example, the NPCs basically has missing heads or bodies for some reason, and when I was fighting the big giant kraken or sea monster or whatever, I couldn't even see him at all. So this forced me to restart the game. Unfortunately, here's the problem with the sea monster fight. If you happen to defeat the kraken or sea monster or whatever, then for whatever reason when you load up your save data during the fight, the game just renders your process unplayable for whatever reason being. The same goes with the ship captain fights, which again, if you don't skip the cutscenes, then you're not going to be able to progress through the game. Because, I don't know, bugs I guess. I wanted to get these out of the way real quick because there's going to be some of those issues that you may have. Now, I should just mention that there are some guns, yet again, in the game where you shoot the guns and whatever, like with the pistol. The pistol doesn't have that long loading thing anymore when it comes to shooting them, so you can basically do whatever you want. Unlike Risen 2, I ended up testing out what the muskets were really like, and well, they shoot like a regular gun, but it's like one shot at a time. When I saw the little indicator, I wasn't sure if it was a critical hit or it was a chance of hitting, but I'm going to assume it was a chance of hitting the enemy with the gun or whatever, and that's basically it. Now, thankfully, the combat has been, again, well, improved, unlike Risen 2, which makes it a little bit easier to execute, and delivering heavy attacks. Well, you don't need training for that anymore, which is something I should mention. It says you can parry, but when you hold the parry button, you're really blocking. Though you can parry your attacks if you're trained, of course. I don't know why it says hold to parry when it's hold to block. I feel like that's a bit of a little misinformation right there. Like I said, you can parry in the game. You need to be trained for it. But they tell you that you press the same button as the block button, in order to parry your attacks. Doesn't matter if it's a human, undead, or even a monster. You can just parry your attacks at any right given time. You can also use magic again. Yay, you can use magic. Well, previously I've mentioned that the mages have been banished. Well, not anymore because they have their own group. Speaking of groups, there's 3 of them again. Just like Gothic. There's 3 of them. There's the Demon Hunters, the Mages, and the Inquisition. Hang on a minute. Isn't the Inquisitions the mage people? Now, for those who played the first game, yes. But they're no longer working together, so that means you're going to have to choose your own group. It doesn't really mean it affects the game or anything like that, but that's just something you should know. Now, I chose to do the mage ones because I felt like it was the right thing to do, and holy cow, I think I was right on that one because the magics are pretty powerful. No, there's no mana meters or anything if asking, but there are some potions you can make to increase your magic power, which is something I recommend. The combat is quite similar to the swords when you use them, but that's about it from that one. But they ain't too bad. But you know what I find weird? When I use the ice magic, the frame rate's fine, but when I use the fire magic on multiple enemies, the frame rate stutters for a little bit for some reason. But speaking of frame rate, for whatever reason being, when you go towards a waterfall or in the waterfall, the frame rate is like all over the place for some weird reason, despite the fact I'm playing the game at 60 frames. I'm not sure how this footage is going to look when I look into it, but if it's in 30 or whatever, I apologize. It's not my fault. But I'm not going to lie to you about this. It really does run in 60 frames, but be aware there are some, well, once in a while you might have a game-breaking crash. I don't know what's causing the crash, because at the beginning of the game when I was at the tutorial place, the game just crashed for no reason being. But then my 9th hour in the game, it crashed again. So I only had about like 2 crashes, and that was it. Some of the characters from Risen 1 and 2 are back, along with some brand new ones. And there's also some legendary items that you guys can find, just like Risen 2. As I previously mentioned, the legendary items can help you gain your stats up. So look for some legendary items if you can, because they will definitely boost up some of your stats, like blades, your XP, and whatever. The XP system is basically the same thing as the Risen 2 game, as I should mention. But there are a couple more stats that have been added in opposed to like 5. But you get what I mean. I remember back then I got in the PS3 version when it was PS Plus, and I thought to myself, wasn't this the game that everybody hated? And then, yeah. The PS3 version has like blurry graphics. I have no idea why. I don't know. I didn't even try to play the PS3 version back then. I kind of played for a little bit, and I just like stopped after I can see why people didn't like it at first. But then, whatever. I got myself the PS4 version. Wow, I think it was on sale, so I got that, and that was it. So, you could basically play Risen 1 and Risen 3 on PS4, but not the second game. And the third game is not even backwards compatible on Xbox, so that's kind of like an odd divide if you ask me. I once mentioned before that Risen 2 had a exploit where, and that's just more of a combat thing, where you keep spamming and the enemies can't attack you, but when they do it to you, it just feels like on console version unplayable due to a lack of dodge rolling. The same thing can kind of happen in Risen 3, except you can use a dodge roll and whatever. But if you're just able to use the blocking or at least a parry attack like I once said, then you should be able to be just fine. But again, it's still more of a spam fest of nonsense, which I'm glad that Elix manages to fix that issue, which really annoys me in both 2 and 3. I should mention a very important mechanic that is not only in this game, but it's also been carried out to Elix. This is called the Soul Meter. The Soul Meter is determined of good and bad, and this really affects the game's ending. As far as I can tell, I think there's about 2 endings in there. One good and one bad. And it really depends on some of your decisions that you make. Another thing that also has come to play with the souls is that if you happen to eat the black heart when it's purified, you can lose some of that soul. But the good news is that if you eat it, you increase your health gauge a lot more by 10. So make sure you know what you're doing, so that way you can preserve some of the soul if you haven't played it good. But if you want to play as bad or whatever, then you could do that, because it really affects the ending of the game. There's at least 2 of them as far as I can tell, good and bad. The game also has 4 chapters this time, but for some weird reason, it doesn't say it in the save file for whatever, unlike Risen 1, which is kind of weird. But I also want to talk to you guys about this too, the bosses. Well, they're at least better than Risen 2, because the final boss in the game was just more of a sword fight, like, you know, any typical enemy. Now, I have mentioned the sea monster, which I thought was fine, but the only problem with the sea monster one is that sometimes the sea monster likes to play hide and seek all day long, and it can be really bad. But if you guys haven't encountered the disappearing models glitch, you're not going to have a good time. So save files are always going to need to be saved often. Even if the auto save is a thing for the game, it doesn't really matter, because if you use it, it's still going to have the same issue regardless in terms of the glitches I once previously just mentioned. But the bosses in the game, I mean, look, Piranha Bytes is not pretty good with bosses, but at least it's better than Risen 2 as far as I can tell. But yeah, I did mention before there were some returning characters that you can see, but there's also some returning locations along with some brand new ones. I should just say that, I don't know, what should I say about this? Risen 1, of all things, just has the best combat as far as I can tell. Even though that it may be janky, it's still better than whatever we got. The graphics aside, I always thought that Risen 1 was just better. Risen 2, I don't know. I don't know what the direction they were doing, because the combat is just the lowest to me. It just wasn't that great in terms of Risen 2. But Risen 3, I mean, sure. It's at least better than Risen 2. A lot of people call this Risen 2.5 or something, and I can pretty much see where they're coming from, because at least it made some improvements from Risen 2. I don't know, but sometimes in this game I can never really hear the music. Maybe it's my settings, but I should have just mentioned something about the PS4 port or whatever. For whatever reason being, Risen 3 on consoles or whatever, I don't remember my experience on PS3, I just remember the graphics being blurry. But when you start the game, the camera on left and right is very sensitive. This was the same issue I've had with Risen 1's port on the Xbox 360, but thankfully you can just basically fix it, which is a good thing. But just be aware that I'm mentioning this because when you guys play, you'll probably see what I mean, because that it was the same camera speed issue that I had. Unlike Risen 1 port of Xbox 360, this actually has setting, so you can pretty much change at any given time. Well, at least in this one, you can actually ride a boat, but that's only for, well, sea monster purposes. You're really just fast traveling and whatever, I don't even care. I don't know if people are gonna like this or hate it. It's a mixed divide, but for anyone who has a PS4, you can play Risen 1 and 3, but if you have to, I think if you have the premium, you can play the third game on the cloud surface thing or whatever that nobody even likes. But weirdly, even though you can play Risen 1 and 2 on Xbox, the third game was never released for the Xbox One or Xbox Series, neither was it made backwards compatible for those things or whatever. Even though the Xbox 360 version does exist, the enhanced version never came out on Xbox One for whatever. But in my experience, grabbing provisions are much easier, same with getting money and XP. So I say Risen 2 and 3 are more of a casual side of things, but I guess Piranha Bytes went back to their old roots, because when Elex came out, they ended up teaming up with THQ Nordic to get the game all ready and whatever. They pretty much brought back everything that made Piranha Bytes, like the Gothic games, like the whole Gothic gameplay stuff. I'll talk about Elex one of these days, but Elex to me so far looks more of a futuristic Gothic, if you ask me. I'll get to the reasons why when I talk about that game in the process. So far, I've only reviewed all of the Risen games and 2 of the Gothic games. So, as far as I can tell you, we're almost done with this whole Piranha Byte stuff. They haven't really made that many games, despite there being a long, lengthy, well, lifespan of the company before they were shuttered around 2024, which is sad. But that's basically what I can say. At least the newer audience can basically play Risen 1 on PS4, Xbox One, and Switch for the first time, for those who haven't played it. And I've already previously mentioned that Risen 1 basically should just be played with the Xbox One first and not the 360, because all the issues are basically fixed, though they still reuse the controls, the UI from the Xbox 360 version. So I'm not going to say too much about Risen 3, but as far as I can tell you, I'll leave it up to you if you really want to play Risen 3 and complete the trilogy. But as far as I can say, it's kind of forgettable, but at the same time, there are characters that you might remember, which, I'll be honest, some of them are pretty funny.